in order to do the testing on the forks, measure the deflection. That's added another 2 weeks onto the project, another 2 weeks of my spare time. That means designing and constructing fixtures to hold the stem to the machine, assembling 3 sets of forks, getting fork braces, making all the fixtures for hanging the weights, etc., etc., and staying late one night doing a dry run on the thing to make sure that everything's going to be going right. So it's a lot of work to test this stuff, but if you don't do it, it's real easy to fool yourself. And you know, a big part of what I'm doing is trying to get, you know, concrete numbers we can give to somebody saying, look, if you do this, it's going to be 40% stronger. If you do this, it's going to be 3 miles an hour faster on the top end. You know, we want hard numbers. The problem exists because in just rough numbers, you have 4 inches of suspension travel at the rear and 6 inches at the front. So what happens is when the bike hits bumps, instead of going up and down like this evenly, it goes like this. The front end travels down more than the rear. And because it travels down more, the dimensions up front change and the trail varies. And since the trail is one of the most important factors as far as how the bike handles, you have something that's very important that is constantly changing when you hit bumps. Now, you know, at this point in time, this is only theoretical. You know, we've done an awful lot of work on this thing to even both ends up so that when we go to the track, we can see really how much effect that has. I spent 2 days dialing in the suspension, and then Gary and I did about 250 miles of testing with it on the back road, and we were zinging along pretty good. So I'm very, very encouraged, and I'm very excited about getting to the track with it and proving this out.
Mike must have had a lot on his mind when I showed up for that first practice session. Well, the first thing being that he needed someone to ride the Super Dinosaur. Since his #1 choice for rider was still recovering from an earlier racing incident, he would need to find someone else who had the experience to handle a bike this large and was also willing to take a chance on this yet untested machine. Mike soon convinced one of the racers that both he and his idea for a Super Dinosaur were for real, and in a few minutes both men would have to trust each other and put everything on the line to see if this dinosaur could keep up with the rest of the pack. Mike had done everything he could to make sure this motorcycle was safe, balanced, and ready to race. Now it was time to let all the hard work and late nights speak for themselves and change all that was once theory into reality. With each passing lap, the rider and machine began to understand one another and learn just how fast each was willing to go. The two were just getting the hang of it when the practice session ended. Then it was time for Mike to find out from the rider just what changes would be needed so that the rider and the machine could go even faster.
Front end feels okay, you know, going in the corners and stuff.
When you're,
coming out.
If you're modulating the corner, does the front end come up and down?
No, it's actually the front end staying pretty stable.
Front end's pretty good?
Yeah.
But you want a little more preload in the rear.
One rotation on each spring in the preload in the rear.
Okay.
Let's see how that. Yeah, we got the rear end that's moving around the most on me.
Okay, now in this, we don't have clickers. It's infinitely adjustable.
Okay.
And you got like 0 to 2 turns, and an eighth of a turn is a big noticeable
Okay.
change. So it's like maybe like a 16th of a turn, or
yeah, do a 16th.
Or you wanted me to give you enough so you can actually tell
I wanna
there's a
feel
difference.
The difference. Now go an eighth.
Okay.
Go an eighth, and
All
then
right.
we'll see what that does.
Very good.
Okay. And then have somebody down there at the like at the entry down over there, you know, with the screwdriver, or whatever on it. And that way, if it's too hard after like 4 laps, then I'll swing in. He can lighten
Sure.
it up. That, you know, maybe half of that go back to 60,
Right.
and we'll see how that works.
Okay.
It was when Mike tried to get the riders' lap times from the race officials that things started to go wrong. The race office keeps track of the hundreds of different riders' times in all the different racing events. They may have never ridden a motorcycle, but to any rider out there, they're as valued as a new set of tires, and you can tell them I said so. But the problem was that there were so many racers that showed up that weekend, the track officials were only allowing 1 race per rider. Mike's rider was scheduled for another race later in the day, which he absolutely had to be in. Mike would be allowed to race his motorcycle, but he'd have to find another rider who wasn't scheduled for any other race. So began the wandering in the pit areas, in search of a new rider. There were plenty of racers out there that wanted to race the CBX, but when they found out that they wouldn't be able to race in their own scheduled event, they'd have to turn down this rare opportunity. Mike interviewed several racers, but settled with this guy. Turns out he's a local race instructor and was at the track just to teach the race school. He said he'd be delighted to take out this super dinosaur and go carnivore on the rest of the pack. And then the whole process of breaking in a new rider started all over again. With every turn and every lap, the rider would learn more and more. And with speeds at well over 100 miles an hour, these lessons can be the most important thing he'll ever know. It's the sense of trust and understanding that can only come with years of riding experience. And as the rider's level of comfort and trust increases, so does the speed. But the practice session was only halfway through when the rider pulled off the track. My first thought was that the bike must have some sort of mechanical problem, or else the rider had a handling problem and couldn't get it under control. As it turned out, neither was true. The rider just wanted to save this super dinosaur for the race, where the difference between predator and prey can be just a matter of inches. Then it was back in the pits again to discuss any changes that would be needed before the race. Mike was ready to make any adjustments to the bike that the rider needed, but all the rider requested was to leave the bike just the way it was.
Gary's in charge of smart alecky remarks this weekend. He's doing really good this morning.
Is he?
Yeah.
Somebody had to do it.
Yeah.
Relatively hard in a few spots, so that's probably after the race going to be all the way up. But I think if it does, it'll be just lightly getting there. You know, it won't be like it's
not like,
slamming it.
yeah.
Yeah, it'll be sneaking up on it rather than.
So we'll have a better indication after the race, but you want to leave it alone for
I think
now?
so, yeah. I think
Okay.
so.
Second call, about